Thank you very much, Renata. It's very strange to speak English, to address to you in English, because while I was listening now to Renata, I had an illusion that I understood at least half of it, and well, it would be such a pleasure to address to you in Slovene, but well, sorry, nothing to do. And thank you very much for coming, because for us this subject of necrorealism and Evgeny Yufit, who is the father of this movement, who created it many years ago, is very special and very touching nowadays, because I would say when Renata suggested us to meet here and to give a talk, it happened like we didn't think even a minute. By some reasons, we immediately answered that the subject of necrorealism and Evgeny Yufit would be our subject, and it's all connected to what happened a few months ago. All of a sudden, our dear friend Evgeny Yufit in the mid of December died, and we still can't believe that it happened. It was so unexpected, and of course that was a news for everybody. In all the newspapers, they wrote that the father of necrorealism is now necro, he is dead. And then they forgot about him, and we would like to keep his memory, and that's why we were suggested in the beginning of January to dedicate it, the whole program at the Merve Publishing House in Berlin to Yufit, and we did it, and now we are very thankful to you that you could share with us his art, and his cinema, and our speech is not a lecture. We would like just to tell you about Yufit, about necrorealism, and to watch with you one short film he made, and then in the end to show you and to watch with you a fragment of a full-length film. And now we start the story itself.
Hvala. Hvala to you, hvala to art, hvala to necrorealism, and hvala to death. Death and ideology directly connected. And this radical movement, necrorealism, was born on the lowest point of so-called stagnation. It was born in a time when the Soviet ideology was literally dying. The main news broadcasted at the Soviet television from 1982 up to 1985 been called by people funeral carriages races. Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev, General Secretary of Communist Party, died in 1982. Yuri Andreevich Andropov, next General Secretary of Communist Party, died in 1984. And finally, Chernenko died in 1985. During these funeral carriages races, what happened on the artistic and everyday scene? What happened in Leningrad in the beginning of the 1980s? A pack of youngsters being collected together by a head of this so-called wild dogs, and his name was Evgeny Yufit. And they gathered together in outskirts of the city, somewhere in the abandoned houses. And what they did, they pretended to beat each other, to organize absolutely pointless battle, and to beat a mannequin that had been used for the medical forensic purpose. Then, once Evgeny Yufit took a camera. First time it was a photo camera. Then it was a 16 millimeters camera. He started to film, and he was arrested. Police invited by civilians came, took the camera, because they suspected Yufit that he is perverse, a perversive person who would love to shoot a battle among civilians, or even worse, probably he is a spy who is gonna to show our Soviet every day in such a perversive fashion. So they took a film, developed it, and invited Yufit to KGB. He came and they told to him, you know, just the idiocy of what you produced liberates you from the responsibility. So he was liberated, but the film is still in the KGB archive.
So the very beginning of the movement was, behind the movement was the idea to have fun, just to be together, to drink, to fight, and mostly to frighten people. Because, for example, Olesye mentioned a mannequin. They gave him, to the mannequin, even a name, Zurab, and you see how they were spending time beating Zurab and then falling him down. And when police used to come, they couldn't understand what's going on, because people were calling to police explaining that it's a terrible fight and somebody's dead already. It's a corpse on the asphalt, and when police comes, there is no corpse, it's just a mannequin and some idiots around. But I would like also to come back a little bit to the beginning of the story, which Olesye mentioned, that all the general secretaries of the Communist Party were dying one after another one, and of course it was an explanation for many journalists and some art historians of the name necrorealism. But I have to tell you sincerely that for Yufit it was always a bad idea. He was always neglecting it, explaining that he is interested in the subject of death as itself. It's not about death of the Communist Party. It's not the end of the Soviet Union, and he was interested in the subject of death, which was repressed, of course, in the Soviet Union. And of course, it was repressed twice, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when capitalism came, nobody was talking about death again. It was like coming from one everlasting life to another one, as if everybody is going to live forever. But I'm sure you know it, because in the Soviet Union, it was always an impression that it will be lasting for at least a couple of billion of years, so it never will be ended. And all of a sudden, death one of the general secretary, then another one, then the third one, and then perestroika happened, as we think with Olesye, first in art, and only afterwards Gorbachev appeared. So Yufit was before, Gorbachev was after. And of course you might ask a question, how is it all connected? All this hooliganism, all this idiocy on the one side, and the one of the most serious question of death on the other side. I'm not planning to answer this question, but in time, when we talk, probably we find some links between these two subjects, and probably we find one link right now, because at some moment, Yufit found in one of the antique bookstores a book which became a Bible of necrorealism. And this book is the Atlas of the Forensic Medicine, written by the very famous Austrian author Eduard von Hoffmann. So this book was really, mostly because of the images, of course, you will see one of them, for example, Now, because of these images, it became really kind of a Bible of necrorealism, and then they found another copy, and even Olesye and me, we also have a copy of this book written by Edward von Hoffmann in our place too. So several people were very lucky to have it at home, this huge book with lots of illustrations, but also it was a very important book in terms of the idea of normality, because it was written in the 19th century, of course, and behind it was the idea how to understand what is normal and what is pathological. And of course, for Yufit, it was very important to follow not normality, but to scare, to frighten, and to make laugh people at the same time, by deconstructing the idea of pathology and normality.
And so this pack of youngsters, they took canvases and brushes, and they started to repaint Eduard von Hoffmann Atlas for Forensic Medicine. And what we saw, for example, Snowdrop, a body of girl, reappeared in the springtime, the dead body, of course, with all these, changes that's happened because the cause of her death. Then you see Valery Morozov. He particularly studied the transformation of dead body after death. He was the most realistic one. And also, you could find kind of conceptual art among necrorealists, like Andrei Mертвый, that literally means dead, Andrei dead, who used the image from Eduard von Hoffmann Atlas. It's called Rose of Saxony, because this person was a carpenter in Saxony. He killed a teenager girl, and he ate this girl. So Andrei Mертвый created homage to this person. Then Debil, that means literally stupid, represented a very complicated case of suicide when a person wanted to save a cat from the tree, and he hung himself on the rope, but passing by person decided to shoot the rope. In meanwhile, he killed this person twice. Then there's another type of suicide created by Serb, sickle, and then another type of different, damages produced by electricity. That is why it's called electricians, made by Vladimir Kustov. But if to speak, as you see, that all those images, they explore the transformation of dead body. But in spite of the nasty, rumors that necrorealists, they used to go to the cemetery and uncover graves, they never did it. They been working in a conceptual way and never been working with the real dead body.
So it's a very strange combination of black humor, we could say, and seriousness at the same time. And you've seen, Olesye showed you different artists, and everyone had his own style. Hopefully Vladimir Kustov is the most active and still alive person from the group. Almost all the others are already dead. And it seems to me it's also very important how they come to the idea of death. It was very, very strange to understand that they never try to claim that they approach death directly. Of course, you all know that it's a very old tradition of ars moriendi, and it's a very old tradition of allegorical representation of death. And the same idea was behind necrorealism, not to try to approach it in direct way, meaning not to open the graves or to represent corpses. As you see in here, it's always still art in terms of being either painter or a photographer or cinematographer. And the most important thing for me, it's always space in between. And here we see rails, for example. And at some moment, I started, many years ago, I started to understand that almost in all the films, we have rails. Almost everywhere, we have the borderline zone. Almost everywhere, we have a place in between, let's say, urban space and suburbs. More than that, Yufet himself, he was born in Leningrad, and he had a flat apartment in Leningrad, but he never liked it. He was always also in space in between. He was living in suburbs. And one of the very last conversation with him was also about rails and about trains. I just asked him what's the reason for him to come back all the time to Russia. The thing is that his parents, they moved to the United States many years ago, and he was still living in very bad and very poor condition in Peterhof, which is one of the surroundings of Sankt Petersburg. And when I asked him, what's the reason for you? And my question was not because why do you come back? Because I also live in St. Petersburg. I never was thinking about moving to some other countries. The thing is that he was dreaming about shooting a new film. Maybe that's not the time now to tell this story, but I'm sorry, I will tell you it now. That at some point, he became a film director. I will be back to this question. And when he became a film director, he, of course, had a camera, and he had friends who agreed to be the actors. Then he found some professional actors, and he had a very good cameraman. So he was working with the professional equipment at Len Film Studio at some moment, and he had even a couple of producers. But about 5 years ago, it's all stopped. Nobody wanted to support him because of just one reason. It's, let's call it avant-garde cinema or experimental cinema. It depends on you, how you like to call it. But definitely it was not cinema for big theaters. It was not entertaining cinema. It was never cinema in color. It was never narrative film, etc., etc. And all producers said, I'm sorry, we can't give you any money. And he was always supported by Dutch Film Archive and by the Rotterdam Film Festival. But then when sanctions came against Russia, Dutch people said, we would love to give you money. We love you, but we can't give you money because it's not possible any longer because of this spoiled relations. So I'm telling this story to you to explain that he was not working, he was suffering for the last, let's say, 5 years. And his parents were in the state, and he was visiting them at least once a year. And last time when he came back from the US, I asked him, maybe you could find something there. Come to Jonas Mekas, for example, to Anthology Film Archive. Talk to him. It would be much easier to find support there. And he said, no, I can't live there. I asked him, okay, where can you live? Where's the place for you to live? And he said, you know, I feel good just in one place, in the suburban train. When I came from JFK to St. Petersburg, this is not a place to be happy. But then, when I move to this suburban train, and I'm coming from St. Petersburg to Peterhof, it takes like 20 minutes, this 20 minutes of happiness, because it's madness in this train. Someone's playing harmonica, someone drinking vodka, someone reading paper, someone's playing gambling cards, whatever is happening there. And for him, this was particularly very special place. So all this long speech of mine now was dedicated to the idea of space in between, and the approach to the subject of death as the subject in between, or in French it's entre deux. So it's always not about death and not about life, but all his creativity, all his life was exactly in between one and another.
And when you are looking to one of his pictures, the early one, you see that they produced in black and white, as well as his later all his films, and you see that's a kind of animation that represents ars marendi. You see zoomorphic creatures, they are connected to each other, and among them you see decomposed sailors' bodies. And then, actually, in 1984, UFIT founded the first independent film studio in Soviet Union, and was called Mzhalala Film. According to one idea, it refers to the family of one of secretary of Georgian Communist Party, Mzhalala Film. According to another version, it reminds Mzha means a dream, and Lala, it's like Dada, you know, baby language. So this film was founded by UFIT at his own studio, his own, actually not studio, but his own flat. He invited film directors from young film directors who started to work with 16 millimeters from Moscow. And it was founded the new movement that got name parallel cinema. That means a cinema that was addressed to avant-garde. And UFIT himself addressed directly to German expressionism, to French surrealism. And just to give you an example, we would love to show you one of his short films that's called Spring. And then Victor give an explanation.
In the meantime, while Olesye is searching for the film, okay, it's done. I don't know if we need to turn off the light. Yeah. To jump, I don't know how to do it. Okay, let me tell you a story about the name of necrorealism in the meantime. It's so interesting how the name is important. In the beginning of perestroika, when we had really very interesting and good television, especially in Sankt Peterburg, perestroika television. It was a special program called Пятое колесо, Fifth Wheel, and they were making incredible programs, including a huge long program on necrorealism and Evgeny Yufit. And it was really strange to... could you stop it for a while? Yeah, please. Yeah, okay. I finish and then we start watching film. So it was a program, special program dedicated to necrorealism on the TV, and they invited, of course, experts, and experts meaning psychiatrists. And psychiatrists were watching films and creating the diagnosis at the same time. And I was astonished just by one thing, they were telling it between each other, two psychiatrists, see, this corpse is moving, the corpse is moving. So they were talking about really dead bodies, not about the actors, not about art, but really about dead bodies. And this is just because of one reason, the name, the title. So for me, it was the first, many years ago, it was discovery that the name might be covering our eyes. We see what we hear. So they were explaining dead bodies, and as if we were watching dead bodies. But you will be now seeing the film Spring, yeah, the short film. No sound. that was the last shot was the Yufit's grandmother.
It was not 2003, but 1987.
87, of course. Maybe it would be stupid of me to say that there is any subject in this film, but there is one. Of course, there is many of them, but one of them would be the heroic death, which was very important subject in the Soviet Union. And because of the collage montage, you've seen this work of what he was shooting himself and what was from some Soviet films. In the result, it was kind of a black parody or something on the idea of the heroic death. So it's again necrorealism in here. And as Olesye mentioned, for Yufit, it was very important German expressionism and French surrealism. Maybe we don't see them in here, and to my mind this is very good because it's his own tradition established in here. I don't see any expressionism in here, maybe a little bit of the surrealistic influence, but not more than a little bit of this influence. But Olesye was at the same time right and true because Yufit was really obsessed only with the experimental and avant-garde cinema. First of all, he was crazy about shooting himself, but not about watching somebody else's films. And the second thing is that if he would watch something, that would be black and white experimental or avant-garde cinema. It was absolutely impossible to convince him to go and to see something made recently, even if it's a very good film. For him, it was not impossible to imagine that something good might be done after 1930, for example. So everything which was really good in film was made before. There is nothing new in this idea. Of course, you know that, for example, Louis Buñuel was claiming that the true film director shouldn't use any music in film, and for Yufit it was also important not to use any music, but to use sounds. Of course, this is 16 millimeters film, so it's silent, but then in the end of our conversation, we will see a fragment from a full-length movie, and please pay attention at how he was great working with the soundscapes, with different sounds, but never with music. And the same thing about narrative. It's obvious and clear if we see something from surrealist cinema in here. It's paralogic or sur-logic, or I don't know how to call it, or psychopathology of everyday life. So for him it was always important to show that the idiocy of logic. Of course, since the time of Dada, we know it's impossible to get rid of dictation of reason, but still it's possible to make laugh out of it, or to try to invent something not really logical at the first sight to get out of this dictation.
And as you saw, Yufit, he used documentary shots, and he used during all his life up to last film he made in 1905. He found it in the archive some less known documentary. For example, in this film you saw some documentary from the circus, from the everyday life from the 50s, and sometimes he came further till 1930s, and to combine together, to show one after another the picture of the most, let's say, exclusive suicide and pointless death, to combine this with the idea of happy Soviet immortality, because all those images of youngsters eating grapes or kids watching to each other or big white sheep represented something that, like in the Soviet ideology, is young, forever. And what is also interesting that he never did a color film. He stayed with black and white. That is why when his film been represented in one of the international film festivals, he was really very much loved by avant-garde film festivals. Somebody from the viewers came and asked, "Excuse me, could you tell me please when this film director died?" And Yufit asked, of course he loved very much this question, but he asked, why? You know, he's supposed to film in the 1960s, and he probably was not very young at that time, quite mature, so he has to die long ago. Probably you are some from the ancestor or somebody who works in the archive, and Yufi told, yes, you are absolutely right, he died long ago. And then, and then what is... so it was the beginning, and then perestroika happened, and one of the biggest privilege of that time that we call with Victor and with our friends revolution, an official government called this banditism and criminal time. So we insist on the revolution. So during this revolution, been open a lot of doors and windows. And so Yufit and other young film directors been invited by Alexander Sakurov, a famous film director from Sankt Peterburg who made a lot of films and who has a great, political position, was invited to experimental studio, and he made his film that was called Nights of Heavens. You'll see this a short fragment in this, at the very end. And this Nights of Heaven already happened to be completely different from the short films, one of the examples we demonstrated to you.
Well, the difference is that it's already 35 millimeters. That's the biggest difference, of course, because it was Len Film Studio, and it was not Sakurov's idea to invite Yufit and other young film directors. It was the official policy that already famous film directors should organize studios and to work together with the young ones. So he invited 5, 6, 7 film directors, including Yufit, but very soon after this invitation, he said, "No, not Yufit, because this guy is terrible. It's impossible to work with him. He's not serious enough." So that's the difference between Sakurov and Yufit. Sakurov is really very kind of humorless film director. At least for me, it's not so easy to watch his films. And Yufit, of course, was with all this hooliganism. And Olesye didn't mention one more thing, that he's supposed to be the father of the Russian punk movement also. When the first, actually in the time of the revolution, everything, all arts were together. I think it was the same in here. It was no visual artists separately, film directors separately, photographers somewhere else, etc., and musicians also somewhere else. No, rock club was one of the most important spots in the beginning of revolution, and lots of exhibitions were made together with the musicians, and concerts were always decorated with the pictures in Yufit too. And I don't know, maybe you know one of the leaders of the Soviet, I would say Soviet avant-garde at the time, Sergei Kuryokhin, with his group Popular Mechanics. It's another story, but Kuryokhin was the most famous probably even abroad, because he was making Popular Mechanics in Berlin and in different places. He was playing together with John Zorn, etc. And Yufit was always on stage too, and they were always representing pathological group. So for Kuryokhin, it was necessarily to have at the stage some classical musicians, especially harp players or symphony orchestra, and it was necessarily to have a rock band. It was always Kino rock, the most famous Soviet rock band called Kino, and For the pathology, Yufit was responsible. So they were making all these crazy movements, which we have seen in the short film on the stage. And then he was trying to work with Sakurov, and it's clear that it was not possible to do at all. But it was not necessarily to work for them together, because Yufit started to make his first full-length movie, which I adore, and I hope you will see it one time from the beginning till the end. The name of the film, let me tell it in Russian, Papa Ded Moroz is dead. So Dead Moroz is dead. It's a very playful title, and he made it in 1991. And he got the main award at the Rimini Film Festival. So it was really very good start. And another thing which was important for him, he moved, as I mentioned already, to 35 millimeters. As Olesye said, he stayed always in black and white. But also what happened, the films became very slow. That's why some people started to say, well, not Sakurov, but Yufit is the real guy who continued the tradition of Tarkovsky, for example, because of this slowness, this attentiveness to the details. But of course, for Tarkovsky, it would be not possible to be as stupid as Yufit. He was also very, very serious. So here you will see it's already professional, let's call it professional group of people at that time, yeah, making a film. And again, for me, of course, rails are the most important thing, even in here. And of course, it would be possible to mention a special maquillage invented by him with tomatoes. Well, old avant-garde tradition, of course. And this is some shots from this Father Frost is Dead, 91,
And this film he already made with Olesye German, who unfortunately already died also, because somehow Olesye German took Yufit, and Yufit proposed to shoot a film based on Alexei Tolstoy novel, Family of Vurdalaks, of vampires, the family of vampires. So you see, everybody was quiet, and Len film, you know, vampires is a good subject for the film. And then at the end, when they saw the film, Olesye German left the auditorium and decided also not to have anything with Yufit anymore. It's happened many times. Then it's happened with Cannes Festival Committee. They especially came to see one of the film shooted by Yufit, and because the film was so avant-garde, and because auditorium, as you are as well, been laughing madly, they told, it's not professional, it's carnivalesque, it's something strange, it's something crazy that is not good for Cannes Festival. And the story happened to be that grandpa became a nice vampire who kissed his grandson, and then you saw the family carrying the coffin, and then everybody become like, you know. But this nice vampire you saw in the advertisement, you so carefully chose. And then also one of the very important subjects are scientists.
Well, that's already for scientists. That's already for the last films, actually. These people, they could also, we could call them scientists, of course, or simply undead, because Olesye mentioned that Cannes Festival refused to deal with Yufit, but at the same time, George Romero was very happy about Yufit, and he was representing his films in Pittsburgh. So, which is, to my mind, it's much more important to be together with George Romero than to be with Cannes jury. So, about the scientists. Maybe the best film is the last one. Only now I recognize that he couldn't make any film during more than 10 years, actually. So this is the last film in Russian, «Прямохождение», bipedalism. And this film was developing the same subject as a couple of previous films made by Yufit, and the subject was the creation by the scientists a new human, a real hero. For example, a film which he made a few years before this one, called The Wooden Room, was about the idea of hybridization of a human with a tree. The whole film was dedicated how to make a really strong human being, how a man might be as ever living in a strong position as a tree. So in this film, it's already another story. There is a story, there is a narrative. So the films will becoming more and more narrative, and the story is about some Soviet experiments in 30s of hybridization of female with a monkey to make a new Soviet human being, half human, half monkey. And in the result of these experiments, so this is actually the main word for his cinema, experiment. Not in terms of experimental cinema, but in terms of experiment in science. So the main characters of his films are scholars, usually military scientists, and the results of the experiments. And here you see the results of the experiments, half human, half monkey. And it was actually not easy to teach actors to work properly. For example, he was I never was in his films, but he was trying me. He told me, could you go like this? And I was trying badly many times, and he said, no, you're not an actor at all. You are really very bad. But some people were really very good copying monkeys in zoo. And for them, it was also very important, for not only for Yufit, but for other necro artists to visit zoos. When we first time happened to be together in Kunstverein Hanover, when we came to Germany, to Hanover, we wanted with Olesye, of course, to go to see Joseph Beuys exhibition or something like this. And they said, no, you are not going there. You are stupid. Only stupid people, they go to the galleries. We all go to zoo now. And then in zoo, they were explaining different monkeys, that this monkey is a real schizophrenic. You can't find anywhere this monkey who suffers from schizophrenia, etc. So the human psychopathology was already displaced on the monkeys in zoo, and in films other way around. So we are talking now about well, there's no sense, of course, to use the American word object art, but in a way we could use this word too. So we are dealing with the scholars on the one side, and with the results or the object from A of the experiments on the other side. And the whole film, partly, well, one of the lines of the film is how to find these objects, to destroy them, to kill them, for people not to know about these experiments. And of course, when I tell now, it sounds not really good when I tell you now this, because it sounds too logical. In the movie, of course, there is no so much logic as it seems to me, at least in my speech. So he wouldn't be very happy maybe of what I'm saying now.
No, I guess Yufit would be very happy, because finally you achieved this movement, you see. You did it. And then he loved very much title, A Positive Regress. Then he called a lot of his, from his photography and paintings, positive regress means that a human being are kind of consciously are coming back. And it was something that was opposite to the Soviet utopist ideology. Of course, in the beginning, when nekrorealism appeared, it was resistant to dying Soviet ideology. But then later on, when one ideology was changed by another one, this consumerist capitalist ideology, Yufit was resistant to the new one as well, because his heroes, they are living on outskirts of the big cities. They are punks and the sense of the marginalized subject who don't belong to any social strata. That is why he was addressing himself on the time and making laugh and also thinking about changing of the human nature, and when one totalitarian ideology was changed by another one, not less totalitarian in some sense. And probably this critical message was really very well understood by, the cinematographical power that didn't permit Yufit to make his new film that he planned. And he even had a scenario, a place where to shoot. And this film had to be dedicated to exploration of Mars. And exploration of Mars started with astronauts, the astronauts who landed on Mars. And somehow they evaluated themselves to the condition of the Martian stones and mountains. And finally, they stayed on Mars as a stones. And of course, it referred to a lot of sci-fi films, including one which Yufit loved very much about monkey. That's about the Planet of Apes and many others. But in a time when he desperately wanted to make films and had no such a possibility, he started to produce pictures again. But you could really see that his pictures looks like shots from the films. He used a black background like in the film, and somehow the images developed. And those images, those pictures been made already after the cinematographical experience. That is why you have this very special dynamic, how he constructed the shot I wanted to tell. And you see again the same characters as he developed, half human, half animals, as he developed in the very beginning. And then he also produced photography, black and white photos. First, he used a film, and he chose carefully one shot. He developed this, enlarged, cut it. Then he started to make a photo, and then he refused from a photo apparat, and he started to make a pinhole photography. And the very last, before he died, he sent to us the very last series of his photo. That is what was not developed, that what he was thinking about, and that is what, until such a limit, his avant-garde intention just pushed him to make films, without color, without films, to make paintings without a paint, and to make photos without camera.
Yeah, there is nothing to add. I'm just say that this is really one of the very last photos he has sent, because we were planning to make a book together with him in Berlin, and he was sending me some last photos. There is no any special effects at all. It's just how it is. It was made with the matchbox, and by some reasons I have very weird probably idea that he ended his life with the most peaceful kind of suicide. He didn't commit suicide in a traditional sense. He just came from the US. He told to his son, I go to get some rest. He laid down at the couch, and then the son didn't manage to wake him up, so he just disappeared. But the idea of this peaceful suicide came to my mind because he was suffering all these years. He didn't want to make paintings or photography. He didn't know what to do, and he was doing photography only because he couldn't find a way how to make a film. And we were trying to convince him to work with the digital camera or to make paintings, etc., etc., but it was not interesting to him at all, so he has just disappeared. And we have some more minutes to see now a fragment, I hope, from bipedalism from the last film, which is, for me, it's a real treasure because it's, to my point of view, it's very, very critical to the idea of creating of a new human. We have spoken with South African artist William Kentridge 2 days ago, and he was telling us about the new devices in the States made to create fearless human, which is for me already not human at all. Okay, and we need sound actually.
Черное солнце. рождения. Способ перемещения сам по себе весьма уязвимый в дикой природе, но, несомненно, впрямую связан с появлением предков современного человека.
Этот архив, пролежавший столько лет в подвале, в первый момент ничуть меня не удивил. Он не выглядел моложе дома и не пугал меня больше, чем визита старика. Все выглядело так, как будто ему полагалось там находиться и полагалось быть обнаруженным. Ступни богов обернуты шерстью. Так, кажется, говорили римляне из моего далекого уже университетского курса. В тот момент я не слышала ничьих шагов. И, конечно, ничего не знала об отце мужа.
Да, это я, привет. Ну, как там у вас на телевидении? Все командуешь? Да нет, спасибо. Я тут ремонтом занялся. И у себя в подвале настоящий киноархив нашел. Похож с довоенных времен. Нельзя ли посмотреть у тебя? Да, на 35 миллиметров.
Не надо больше.
Хорошо, я готов к тебе прямо завтра. Договорились?
This already another film. It's a pity to stop, but you know. So actually, I just think that Yufit, he did this selection himself. I asked him to make 15 minutes selection from all his films. And he did it. It was a particular reason. Actually, he loved very much shorter version, probably because the copyright and probably because he found something extra, something too much he did. And just to think about his critical approach to the so-called reality, and to think about this, the positive regress idea, I guess that it is important to remember as well that besides the fact that Yufit announced that he is not interested in contemporaneity, he is not interested in the current moment, he used to study a lot. He came to archive, he found all these footages, all these crazy ideas that he discovered in the 20s and the 60s. And somehow, looking back, he was looking forward.
Well, for me, he is one of the best representations of Jean-François Lyotard's idea that if you, to be contemporary, you have to be out of your time, if to say it in a simple way. So Yufit was out of the city, he was out of his time, but when I watch his film, it seems to me it's about not only nowadays, but about I'm afraid, now of our future. For example, if you pay an attention to the books on the table, the title of one of the book was Military Zoanthropotechnique. I think that's the future. And I don't know what else to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture, and I'm really pleased to learn about your friend. I was thinking that, you know, in the 90s, you had many other artists who were dealing with the issue of death and kind of reflecting also the, you know, the changes, political changes that were happening, all the mafia kind of related death. Steven Shanabrook, for example, was working in Russian morgues and in American morgues and molding sort of chocolates on the wounds and eyes of dead people. You know, one of his art, for example, combines eyes. He, you know, sort of chocolates. It really looks like kind of bomboniera chocolates, but its eyes, some are opened and some are closed. And I asked him, what's the difference? And he said, the opened eyes are from Russian morgues because people died so quickly in the sort of battles between various gangs that they didn't have the time to close their eyes. The Americans kind of were a little bit slower, which is why their eyes were closed. And then you also had kind of a similar movement, you know, even in Mexico. I remember the artist Margolis, who was using the water she collected in the morgues, where people, you know, sort of were kind of brought because they died in the battles of the cartels. And, you know, in some way, we also have in the 90s in photography the Enrique Metenides, another Mexican artist who became famous because he was taking pictures of people who actually died in various accidents or electrocutions, and just as a kind of photographer for the newspaper. But he became famous in the moment where there was a kind of a desire for this kind of catastrophe art. So I wonder if, you know, Yufit is sort of kind of, you know, nonetheless a contemporary in this time of the 90s where, you know, there is a particular obsession with death and, you know, seeing death realistically.
Thank you very much, Renata. I think you're right. It was kind of a trend. We could also recollect Joel Peter Witkin in the States, or our friend from Kiev, Arsen Savadov, who was making families in morgue out of corpses. He was like assembling them into different families. But at the same time, it's like the wind of changes, it's like the wind of time. And also, again, I have to tell you that Yufit was trying to be out of trends, out of time. He was always all alone. He was not very social person, and he was not interested very much in what was going on in 80s. So I say, my idea that you are completely 100% right and 100% wrong at the same time, I would say, in this case. And again, we see how he is approaching this subject in a completely different way. Again, there is no even one corpse or morgue in his photos or film ever. No. So it's a very interesting idea of the time and reflection on death. I agree with you, but there are completely different ways.
But I guess also, Renata, thank you so much, that has to do with ideology, because when we are living inside, we can't see ideology. The same with death. When we are alive, we can't see it. So Yufit, from my point of view, developed this invisible image of ideology. He actually served for death as a photographer. So death is invisible somewhere waiting us in. And then he printed this out on the border, first in the 80s, and then during the 90s and 2000. That's not about real corpse, but that's about a subject who is mortal subject. And as you know, that not only Soviet ideology proposed to us immortality, but contemporary ideology also proposing to us immortality, claiming stay young forever. That means to be dead from the very beginning.
Yeah, and well, he was very much interested in anthropology, as you see. And as we all know, death is the principal moment for, let's call it, humanization. When you recognize other's death, you could only speak about life when you know that the other is mortal, that there is a death of the other. And I remember now that he was very happy to hear the words of Peter Weibel that necrorealism is the only important art, because every art should be necrorealism, because necropolis is the capital of art. That was his word, as far as I remember.
I really like the American movement, immortalists, you know, because their idea is that if we believe in immortalism, then we will be immortal, you know. And then they have a nice answer. When some of them died, they said they didn't believe strongly enough. They started doubting in the last moments.
Just to add a little bit to immortalism, I recollected a movement that, according to like some publication, existed in the 1920s in the Soviet Union. It was developed in the laboratory of Organization of Labor, a special, a special division to make functional dead corpse with the help of electricity. And according to the journalists, those carpenters and workers, they could still function, for example, and they could be used, for example, on the far north, where the conditions for the living body are unsurvivable. So if to have a small but powerful power station, you could have a kind of, pack of corpse supported with power station, and it would be the very advanced division of proletarians who do not believe in the Christian death and who has to function even when they have no these living forces. Sorry.
Thank you. So I'm sure there are questions, comments.
Nobody's interested in this?
Too interested.
Dragan, what about yours? Could I call it post-mortem experience about Dragan, what about your group experience when you're the member of the group still function after the death as avatars?
Yeah, maybe it's a very precise question for me these days, because I am really sensible, because second actor died in 50 years theater production, Nordung, 3 weeks before, in fact. Her name is Iva Zupancic died, and I am really normal. I don't like to go now deeply, but I really like to tell that I'm thinking these days very intensive with all these, let's say, questions which come from 20th century art. In fact, because in fact was huge fight for anti-mimetic non-object art, and finally this battle and this fight produce holy abstractia. Sorry for this oxymoron. Normal, I thinking, and I apologize because I come too late. I come from Italy, and I have problems. Sorry, I must tell this, and I'm in confusion. But when I listen necro art, I remember very good the time when production come in the last part of ideology, in the mean Soviet ideology, and the necro art, in fact, was a direct answer for abstractia. You know, necro artists not go back how trans avant-garde produce new picture and new figura, you know, come dead figura, the mean corp. And central question for these days for me is how to create this telemetric and let's say algorithm for human being. In fact, how to create this radio and radial information for human, for Ivan Zupančić, sorry. And yesterday, my friend Ivo Godnić, same have thrombosa and plums problem, attack on the plums, and he's now this moment in hospital, same, you know, and come all this hospital, corp, pathological question. In fact, 1980s was incredible movement in Balkan. It's fantastic movement, and two-person movement. You know, in fact, autopsia. And for me was autopsia part of this big important, let's say, way for answer for abstractia. Because astral emotion from Kandinsky disappear. Malevich abstractia, in fact, don't have precisely answer. And normal, there was incredibly important necro, but in this time same come this necro-romantica, necro-punk, all these moments, but I produce now my associatia because you push me in this situation with a very precise question, but I don't have any precise answer. In fact, I think that I understand your question, but I don't have good answer. Okay, this is.
Thank you so much, Dragan. Sorry for, like, you know, for directly address, but because I knew about, like, you know, this, you're lost, and yeah.
Any other question or comment?
Yes, well, thank you very much for this presentation. It was really fascinating. I at least didn't know anything about this. It's quite something. And I just have a couple of comments. Maybe one is that necrorealism seems to be a misnomer in a way. I mean, this is a misnomer, a misleading name for the whole thing. Because it's precisely not, and I think this is important, that they never worked with real corpses, they never went to the morgues, they never had this kind of morbid fascination with the real of death. But necrorealism precisely in the sense of producing a real of death which is independent of the realistic depiction of death. And this I find very interesting. And another comment on, I don't know if I really have a question or something, but I found very interesting what you said about the question of everlasting life as being an inbuilt spring of ideology. And which, of course, is true. It's part of, I think it's part of a secularization, because religion traditionally took care of this, the everlasting life. And once this is removed, then have various competing ideologies who somehow have to try to create the illusion of an everlasting life within this life. I mean, prolong all kinds of things. And, well, okay, communism was one take on this. I mean, and it's interesting that he went back to the experiments in the 30s with production of the new human, which really took place and which were kind of crazy. I mean, but it was an essential part of the early development in the 20s and the 30s. both of the avant-garde and then of the Stalinist takeover of this idea and twisting it around. So this was profoundly, it was profoundly there as one line of thinking. And of course, as you mentioned, he was equally opposed to this kind of hypothesis of everlasting life inscribed in communism as he was to the other way of doing this, which is, okay, stay forever young, have all the technologies, fitness, whatever, the idea of endlessly prolonging life. And so in this way, I mean, he works also against this secular idea of the everlasting life, which is okay, it's just a comment,
Thank you so much, Mladen. While you were talking now about everlasting life, another idea came to my mind, that in ancient Greece, as we know, there were two completely different deaths. One was Gorgo, another one Thanatos. And Thanatos was not death at all, because it was connected with the heroic life. If you are a hero, which was somehow connected with the Soviet ideology too, if you are a hero, then you keep on living forever in the hearts and in the memory of humankind. So you are never dead, ever dead. So that was also a very important moment for him. That's why I think you are completely right. And as for the first comment, I also have an idea that we don't need, the name is definitely misleading, you're right. But at the same time, if we think about cinema in itself, let's say, or art in itself, it's always already about being dead, or how in life it's always already incorporated the idea of being dead. So you can't really break these dialectics. It's impossible to speak about one and not to speak about another one. And I even remember how I was impressed. I know that you are not very fond of deconstruction, but the idea of economy mimesis, to my mind, is very good. That it's not mimetic in terms of imitation of death, but it's about the process of dying while you are still alive. So I think it's, thank you so much for the brilliant comments. Yeah, I'm very happy to hear it.
Any other question?
I would just like to ask you, what was the connection with new academism movement? Was there, yeah.
Actually, New Academism was founded by Timur Novikov, and Timur Novikov and Evgeny Yufin, they've been friends, and they kind of been exhibited together. So nekrorealizm, a new artist that was founded also Timur Novikov, existed at the same time. Then Timur Novikov told that it's over, the time with new artists, and he found a new movement, New Academism. But this is a very good question, because New Academies, from my point of view, somehow become a parody of this everlasting life. Because Timur told, okay, in a time when it's permitted, like, you know, because new artists been very much directed to avant-garde. In the time when avant-garde become permitted, Timur told, okay, now we have to turn to advertisement. And advertisement is always dead, like, you know, because it's a glance. It's something like, you know, like a sleeping beauty. So in a way, New Academy is probably even more dead than nekrorealism. But of course, the artists, they knew each other. And for example, speaking about Sergei Kuryokhin, who also was here and whom Dragan knows, and he was his friend. And for example, it could be a concert of popular mechanic. The first appeared Evgeny Yufin with his nekrorealistic pact, so with people dressed in the old Soviet army outfit and doing this acrobatical, stupid movement, taking something very strange in hands. And then appeared new academical group with Maslov and Kuznetsov dressed as old gods, antique gods with all this decoration, almost naked. and with some musical instruments. So they've been movements that have been developed and founded in Leningrad first, then in Sankt Peterburgu, and personal relationships and friends, and unfortunately, kind of everybody is meeting each other on the graves. Like, you know, we have a nearby Smolenskaya graveyard, the oldest one from the 18th century, and we have all our, not all fortunately, but quite a lot of our friends just living there right now, like Timur Novikov, Evgeny Ufit, Georgy Guryanov, Vladik Mamshov-Monroe, etc. Like, you know, that's also. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, in similar direction as Mladen about, you know, the kind of the problem with the title of this art. Not only necrorealism, also there is very little realism. You know, you know, especially, and you know what you were saying about the finale of the artist, that he kind of abandoned film, even abandoned kind of camera, and so on. Especially in times when we have a kind of a necrorealism emerging with the help of new technologies, which are totally available, like, you know, people who film real life death and place it immediately on Facebook, or you know, actually, you know, kind of perform killings so that they can place them on internet and be observed in this moment of kind of reality. So for me, it's kind of interesting, his abandonment of technology at the moment when technology is so widely available.
Well, he, as we mentioned several times, he was crazy about 20s and 30s, so for him, instead of going in the direction of the new technology, he was using the matchbox to make pinholes, for example. He could afford, of course, to buy a good camera and to work as a photographer, but it was completely out of his interest. He was, at the same time, if to come back to the previous question, he was at the same time surrounded by hundreds of friends, including Timur Novikov, etc. But at the same time, he was always alone and all in his own ideas about anthropology, the origin of humankind, the end of humans, and technology too. We didn't cover, of course, lots of questions, but like for me, for example, it's very interesting how many different devices he's using in his movies, and how all these telephone apparatuses and other machines are working. It's also very interesting. So there are really lots of different subjects, of course, in this film. But I agree that not only there is no necro and there is no realism, but there is necrorealism.
Thank you. Renata, can I have a question to you? Yeah, that's the not easy question about death drive. Yeah, because in a way, like, you know, that's not the first but second time when Ufit represented here. The 12 years ago, 2005, I suppose, or 2003, Ufit participated in the exhibition in your museum that was called Seven Sins. And Ufit was represented at the sadomasochistic section. So, no, sadomasochistic. No, yeah, of course. You know, one doesn't exist without another, you see. And yeah, exactly. In this museum, like, you know, but yeah, and another building, yeah, and another building. So, and speaking about death drive, please, because, you know, it's definitely that people, they express this death drive during the stagnation. During the stagnation, people used to drink, to eat this terrible food, and just didn't take care about anything. They've been like teenagers who really wanted to die young. That is why they try everything what is possible. Like, you know, and smoke, drink, whatever, like, you know. But then, you know, we had a revolution. It was another death drive, because even one of the famous singer, it was very popular song, I want to die young. It was like a song of the generation. Then we have a reaction right now, and there is again death drive, not because the sanction, but also people become again drunk, and they do not care about life, they eat terrible food, they drink a lot, etc. And somehow, that's speaking on the ordinary level, not on the psychoanalytical or philosophical, but somehow Yufit, he also reflected this death drive, or probably anxiety about this. Please, I really want, I've been thinking, God, it's such a great, Renata represents Yufit. It's a great chance to ask about death drive.
Oh. I think, Viktor already mentioned Eros and Thanatos, and in some way, we can say that death drive can also be perceived as a certain kind of a denial of death. Because with Eros and Thanatos, you always have also, you have death and you have a renewal. You have always also coming out back from nothing, and a certain, what you were explaining of people who said, I want to die, many times that can be really exactly the opposite, that the people might be uttering, I want to die, but with the hope that uttering this prevents actual death, creates a certain kind of a shield, and they are uttering their anxiety, but we should also not forget, Kierkegaard saying that, we might be horrified of death, but, immortality would be much more anxiety-provoking, the possibility of endless life, which we are entering now with the genetic experiments, we are living in times of a certain kind of a denial of death, but also real possibilities of endlessly prolonging death, which creates, all kinds of new anxieties, which I think, he was reflecting probably in his own way when he speaks about science. I really liked that it was the bureaucrats who were in the picture presented as scientists, at least, in the scientific world, we mingle, we don't see people like this. It was more kind of KGB apparatchiks and bureaucrats. Yeah, Soviets, but there was your writer, was it in the 30s, who wrote this novel, which was, I think, yeah, but another one about the scientists who lived for 900 years. And, they were, in the novel, you could figure out which were, kind of true scientists and those who were lying. The lying ones had hair grown out of their ears. That was the sign that they were not to be trusted. I forgot, Branko, maybe you know the Strugatsky. Yeah, Strugatsky, exactly.
Yeah, but don't wrote about, also about forever.
Yeah. So maybe we should finish now, and instead of going into death drive, go to some enjoyment, jouissance, which is close to death drive anyhow. Thank you, Olesye and Viktor, and thank you so much, for this first presentation joint in Ljubljana, and I hope it will be the start of many more. Thank you.
Thank you.